tell me if you can hear Jenna say hello.
Hello.
Just wait for the delay. It's a good sign. We're going to risk it and count in. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. If anyone's watching yet,
Yes.
welcome to Romance Bookshelf Bingo. I'm really excited for the chat this evening. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are on today. We're obviously spread out all over the place, but for myself and Tara, we are on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and Nina and Melissa are on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that we are on stolen land and sovereignty was never ceded. Um, but uh, and I'd like to introduce my wonderful fellow authors. Melissa Keil is the author of Life in Outer Space, which was the winner of the 2013 Epicenter Project and the 2014 Ina Noel Award. And she's also the author of The Incredible Adventures of Cinnamon Girl, The Secret Science of Magic, and the short story Sundays, which is in the Love Oz YA anthology Begin and Begin. Nina Kenwood has worked in books and publishing for over 10 years and currently works at an independent bookstore, and she won the 2018 Text Prize for her debut novel, It Sounded Better in My Head. And Tara Eglington is the author of 4 young adult novels: How to Keep a Boy from Kissing You, How to Convince a Boy to Kiss You, My Best Friend is a Goddess, and The Long Distance Playlist. My Best Friend is a Goddess was on the notable list for the CBCA 2017 Book of the Year for older readers. And I'm Jenna Guillaume. I probably should have said that first, but I'm the author of What I Like About Me and You Were Made for Me. And I also write a lot about rom-coms and romance for websites like BuzzFeed and Junkie, and I tweet a lot about Christmas romances if you follow me on Twitter. But yeah, tonight we're going to do Romance Bookshelf Bingo. So we're all going to talk about the romance books or romance adjacent books that inspired us as writers and that we just really enjoy. If you've been following Oz Authors Online on social, you'll hopefully have gotten your own little bingo card and filled out some guesses of what we're going to talk about tonight. If you have shared those guesses with us and you manage to get 4 out of the 16 books that we're going to talk about right, you will win a prize. So if you find yourself checking off your list and get 4 right, get in touch with us online and on social media and we will get a prize to you. But let's get straight to it. We'll just get talking to romance books, which is my absolute favorite subject. Tara, why don't you share with us your first book?
Wait, I've got it.
Yes. So my first book is a bit of a romance adjacent book. It was probably the first kind of romance book that I got into because I remember vividly reading it when I was 13 over a summer. And that's Anne of Green Gables, actually. Yes, yeah, very close to my heart. Obviously, a classic novel written by L.M. Montgomery, set in the fabulous P.E. Islands in Canada. And many of you would know it's the story of, it starts out with 11-year-old Anne who's been living she's an orphan and she's adopted by a brother and sister called Matthew and, oh gosh, I'm had Marilla, thank you, Marilla. And they're expecting to adopt a boy. And then Anne shows up, and she's obviously a girl, and she's a girl full of, unafraid to be herself. She's prone to sort of bursts of temper. She's loving. She's just fabulous all around. So this Anne of Green Gables is part of a 7-book series following Anne throughout her life. And this one begins, and the sort of romance feature in it is her relationship with Gilbert, who she meets, I think, on her first day at the local school. So this is set in, I think, around the 1880s, 1890s. So she's sitting in a classroom. she's noticed a handsome boy, but she's ignoring him because she's very focused on her studies. And then he whispers across to her the word carrots. And she's a redhead and she hates her red hair. So she gets furiously angry and she turns around and she smashes her writing slate on top of her head and gives him a huge stun. He doesn't know what's happened. And that kind of sets off their dynamic. So here's this boy that she doesn't want to even acknowledge that he exists. She won't even call him Gilbert. She just calls him the boy. And throughout this first book, they just have these interactions together where she tries to ignore him all the time and he's kind of fascinated by her. And the fabulous thing is, he really kind of admires her intelligence and her spirit and everything. And they're both quite smart. So they're kind of up against each other for all sorts of academic prizes and tests and things. So I kind of love Gilbert. Was kind of the first fictional crush that I ever had. And that relationship was actually kind of parallel. There was a boy also with a name starting with G who I went to school with in high school, around the same age as Anne. And we had the same thing. We kind of had this, he would kind of tease me and I would pretend that I couldn't stand him. And secretly I thought he was cute. And but Anne of Green Gables was a huge kind of influence for me in terms of my first book, How to Keep a Boy from Kissing You. So that kind of similar dynamic, Aurora and Hayden, he's the boy next door. She finds him infuriating, and they kind of, the whole book's them kind of being thrust together, and developing relationship, and the audience kind of going, oh, is this going to happen or not, which is very similar to the Anne story. So
I love that. I had that with my now husband too, because I started dating him in high school. We were competing to be the top of the class. It's really Anna Gilbert. Melissa and Nina, I saw you guys nodding. Do you also find inspiration from, or just love Anne of Green Gables?
Oh, absolutely. And Gilbert Blythe, totally first literary crush. That kind of the banter and sort of that idea of finding your intellectual equal, I think, was so appealing as a young person. I think I read, what was it, the 7 books and then the ones with their children, and multiple times when I was a kid, and also loved the series as well. Is Megan follows?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Desperate for red hair as a young person.
Yeah. Nina?
Well, look, I read it. I wouldn't say I'm a mega Anne of Green Gables fan. I remember enjoying it, but I'm probably the least fan here of it.
That's fine.
Nara, what did you think of the Anne with an E Netflix series?
That was really interesting, actually. My husband and I watched the first season together, and he was kind of watching Anne. He was like, oh my gosh, I see where this has come from, like your stubbornness and everything. But no, I thought it was interesting because it kind of drew in other themes of that time, like some of the things that were obviously the undercurrents of society, and whether that was inequality, financially, or the status of women, and just the reality is, I guess, of being a young girl growing up in that time. I really enjoyed it. Made me desperate to visit like PE Island myself one day. Still on my list.
Definitely on the bucket list. I think what I love about Anne of Green Gables is it's like a very, like, it's one of the quintessential like hate, like enemies to lovers kind of stories, and just like the tropes along the way, like the slate breaking over the head. I think Melina Markeva has talked about in the past that she always has like the slate breaking moment with all of her romances, which I really love. Melissa, what's your first pick?
I think all of mine have a theme, which they're all enemies to lovers, which I think is probably one of my favorite tropes. The other one being best friends to lovers. But my first pick is Joel and Kat Set the Story Straight by Nick Earls and Rebecca Sparrow, which is an Australian YA. I think late 2007, I think it was published, so a little while ago, how long ago. And it's probably the sort of most classic or quintessential kind of rom-com on my list as well. So it's the story of Joel and Kat, who are in their last year of high school, and they are confirmed nemesis, enemies, despise each other. But through various complications, they're thrown together to do a class assignment together, which also is another one of my favourite tropes, the enemies getting thrown together and forced to work together in some kind of way. But their class assignment is they have to write a tandem story. So they have to write a chapter or a chapter each and then pass it back and forth between them, and they're not allowed to discuss the plot or share anything about this story as they're writing it. And so at the same time, they're both dealing with, you know, various family complications, and they both have quite complicated families and awkward families up to various shenanigans. And of course, as they're thrown together, they discover things about each other that turns their nemesis relationship into so much more. This book, though, I think it just hits so many right notes for me. Like it's hilariously funny. It has a dual narrative, so it's told from alternating chapters with the two characters. The story within a story that they write. I couldn't actually find my copy of this book, so it's been a while since I read it, but I still remember bits of the story that they're sharing between each other, because they're basically trying to one-up each other and mess with each other. So, you know, she's writing a very earnest kind of Jane Austen-esque romance, and when she passes it back to him, it becomes this kind of Jason Statham action opus, and they're trying to keep each other's characters off. So the story within a story is really hilarious. And it's really funny, like laugh out loud funny, but also really heartfelt, which I think is really hard to pull off, that you know, making something hilarious and having the kind of slapstick moments, and then actually making you really care about these characters and really root for them. Like I remember having that sort of, you know, warm heart moment at the end when they finally kind of get together. That sort of, you know, squishy heart feeling. And I was actually really sad that I couldn't find my copy of this book, because when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I really wanted to reread it again. And so I'm going to have to dig out a copy. But yeah, I think I read it when I started to sort of, when I was working in publishing and sort of trying to find the genre that I wanted to write in, and so it sort of stuck in my head as being as being, I think, just a really great, solid, funny, warm Aussie rom-com.
I love that. I actually haven't read it, and I feel like I definitely should. Like, you made it sound so amazing.
It's really great. Like I said, I think the mark of a good book for me is one that I haven't read in years, and I still remember so much of it. It's stuck, you know, so much of the bits of their relationship and these funny little moments and bits of the story that they're writing.
Yeah, the ones that get under your skin.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Nina, what's your first pick?
We're going to have to tweet a list of all the books we're talking about.
We can go back and read them ourselves.
Yeah.
All the books I chose are actually pretty recent. So my first book is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, which is kind of more, I guess you'd say, romance adjacent than just a straight romance. And I picked this because it's sort of, in terms of inspiring my own book, it's definitely one of the books that was most inspiring to me. This is the story of Kath, who goes off to college. She has a twin sister, Ren. Ren sort of takes to college and is going out and partying and enjoying herself. And Kath is an introvert, and she's awkward, and she's struggling being away from home. And she develops a relationship with her roommate's ex-boyfriend, Levi, who is kind of this sweet, nice guy. And it's just a really slow burn romance. I think Rainbow Rowell does what I think of as gentle romance really well. She does some of the best first kiss scenes and slow build-ups I think of anyone out there. There's a scene in this book where Kath and Levi's sort of stay up all night because Kath's reading aloud to him from a book. She's reading aloud The Outsiders to him, and it's just this really beautiful moment. And I just really loved, just the way that the relationship is built slowly.
So romantic.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I love all of Rainbow's romances, and Attachments is one of my faves of hers, which is an adult romance actually, but she does do that slow burn so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, my first pick, since we're talking about enemies to lovers, is the classic Pride and Prejudice, which you can't really say it properly because it's a dark cover, but I just think like that is, I feel like that's the original enemies to lovers story, right? Which, I mean, if you don't know Pride and Prejudice, like, you should. Like, what are you doing with your life? And go reading that immediately. But obviously it's like, you know, they hate each other as soon as they meet. Mr. Darcy is like the rich, stuck-up guy and insults Elizabeth as soon as he meets her, and kind of says that she's not good looking enough for him, which you wouldn't think is a good place to start a romance. But the way that they, like Anne and Gilbert, it's that whole thing where it's like hate is so close to love, right? And it's like it's just that tension and the electricity between them is amazing. It's so much like buried under the surface, and in all the insults and all of the snide kind of comments, there's that like intense interest in each other that is like, once they learn more about each other, it's so easy to switch it over into love. And Darcy obviously switches into love consciously before Elizabeth does, but still manages to insult her. But I just think, I just think every romance writer, or every writer basically, anyone writing some kind of romance, especially enemies to lovers, has been influenced by this book. I know myself, what I like about me, like I definitely had an enemies to lovers thing, and I would say my main character, my lead boy Beamer, is not a Mr. Darcy type. He's kind of like really gross and a very Aussie teen boy, but definitely the kind of the sparring and the way that, and what I love about Mr. Darcy is the way that he does very thoughtful and quiet things that Elizabeth doesn't necessarily know to start with, and it's not to prove anything to her, it's literally just because he wants to make her happier. And I think I definitely was inspired by that. I think that's a really lovely aspect of that romance. But yeah, I can't be the only Pride and Prejudice fan here. Yeah, so good. And also obviously the miniseries from 1995 is the only adaptation that matters. Controversial.
I think it's the peak.
Pattern, but I'll probably get in trouble for saying that. So
no, look, I'm open. I think he's the second best Darcy, but.
I think what I really like about him, his interpretation, is that you can tell that he's enamored with her right from the beginning, and he's just so awkward. And that kind of awkwardness that Darcy doesn't often get to play up.
I agree. I think like a big part of Darcy's character is his social anxiety and his like social ineptitude, and he definitely does a good job of that.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to our second pick. Let's do it in a different order just to keep things spicy. Melissa, why don't you share your second pick with us?
Oh, okay. So all right, I'll talk about my next pick is this book, How to Tell Toledo from the Night Sky by Lydia Netzer. This is a book, I love this book so much, but it's one of those books that I wanted to recommend to everyone I know, but I'm also really careful who I recommend it to, because it's definitely not a book for everyone. And I sort of feel personally affronted if people don't like this book. I've lent it to a few people who have been a bit, and I mean, I didn't write it, but it kind of I feel insulted that people don't like it. So I'm very careful who I lend this book to, because it's very weird. It's a very, very weird kind of love story. It's about two scientists, two astronomers, George and Irene, who George works at the Toledo Institute of Astronomy, and he is his research involves looking into the stars for proof of God, basically. And Irene he's very dreamy, and this really kind of beautiful character who's very much into poetry, and Irene is the complete opposite. She's very sort of mathematically minded. And she starts working there, and her job is to make black holes. And so they're both kind of the characters that I love. They're weirdos. They're wonderful weirdos. They don't really fit in the world. They don't fit with other people. But of course, when they meet, they immediately fit with each other. But unbeknownst to both of them, their mothers were actually childhood best friends, and their mothers were both astrologers. And their mothers came up with this idea that you can make soulmates by giving birth to these children on the exact same day and then separating them but raising them to be each other's like twin soul. So it's a really weird book, but I think it's really beautifully weird. It's really geeky. It's got so many elements that I love. It's this combination of kind of science and lucid dreaming and asking these really big questions about destiny and fate. And it's really funny, and it swings from being really funny to being really sad and really poignant. And going from sort of this hardcore kind of science, sort of physics and to I guess magical realism. It kind of swings back and forth between these two things. It's honestly unlike any book that I've ever read, which is why it's always on my top list. And I sort of think I can't think of anything that it's like, but the closest thing I can think is if you liked something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's got that kind of tone or style to it. And
when did it come out?
2014, I think. So it's her second book. So her first book was Shine, 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 which was also really great. She hasn't had another one since, but I definitely would recommend it if you like a love story that has a lot of other stuff happening. There's a lot of other subplots. There's a lot of things with it. It's hard to talk about the plot without giving away kind of spoilers, which I don't want to do because I'd really love people to read this book. But there's lots of subplots and characters that kind of seem insignificant that become more significant. But the main two characters are just really, really beautiful. And even in between all of the science and the mysticism and the discussion of religion, you just really want these two people to work out their stuff and get together at the end. So
that sounds amazing.
Mm.
How did it influence your writing, do you think?
So my last book, Secret Science of Magic, was about a scientist or about a teenage genius, a mathematical genius. I as I said, I love people who are kind of on the margins, people who are really struggling to kind of find their place. And I love that idea of building a relationship with someone else who's struggling as well, and kind of figuring out how these two kind of people mesh and match. And so I think I think there's a lot of that sort of unconsciously, I don't think consciously, but when I think about it, I definitely threaded in some of those themes when I wrote Secret Science of Magic.
Yeah, awesome. Nina, what's your next pick?
My next pick is Amelia Westlake, which is a Australian YA queer rom-com with an amazing cover. This is one of my favourite covers of all time, I think. It's just such a good cover. It is the story of, I guess it's the enemies to lovers trope. It's it kind of takes the trope of the like uptight, high-achieving girl and the slacker boy and makes it queer. So you have Harriet, who is sort of the perfectionist, uptight, high-achieving girl, and Will, she's a sort of slacker, sort of cynical, Harriet's opposite, and they come together it's sort of like a feminist hoax that they put together, creating a fake person called Amelia Westlake, and that sort of joint project brings them together and they slowly fall for each other. And it's just lovely, slow burn, two people who don't want to fall for each other but do, and I just had such an enjoyable time reading this book, and I love it.
Yeah. So you've mentioned slow burn in both of your picks
I
tonight. Do you
know.
think that's something that you're particularly drawn to in your reading and your writing?
I guess so. It's revealing it to me. I guess so. The all three, apart from Fangirl, then this and then my next two are all dual perspective, sort of alternating point of view, which my book wasn't. But then what I'm trying to write right now is. So I guess it's
Ooh.
sort of I'm drawn to those narratives when when I'm just immediately thinking of romance books at the moment. I'm
Yeah.
drawn to that.
Interesting, very interesting. I will say we will have a little bit of time for audience questions towards the end. So if you want to drop in the chat, if you want to ask any of the authors any questions about any of these books we're mentioning or their writing, maybe something about Nina's dual perspective work that she's currently working on. We'll leave time for that later. But Tara, what's next for you?
Yeah, next for me is a book called I Capture the Castle.
I love that.
Yes. This is a book that I try and pass on to as many people as I can, actually. It's one that's like very close to my heart, and often people haven't read it before, so it's really special to share it. So this one's by Dodie Smith, who's actually the author of 101 Dalmatians. And it,
I had no idea that was the same person.
yeah, who would have thought it? It's quite interesting. And it was published back in 1948. So it's this coming of age story, and it's sort of, I guess, before YA was kind of more of a known thing or a known concept. So it's a story about a girl called Cassandra Mortmain, and she's around 17 or 18. And so she's part of a family. Her father is kind of this like James Joyce like writer who's had one book published, and it was a huge success many years before. And ever since then, he's had terrible writer's block and he can't produce anything. So the money started to run out, and it's set in around the 1930s. So he moves his family. So he moves his family, his girlfriend Topaz, Cassandra's older sister Rose, and also her younger brother as well, into a castle, into this sort of like crumbling, almost derelict castle in England. And Cassandra is an aspiring writer herself, so she's kind of documenting her life there in the castle, with all the different eccentric characters, and kind of like the harder sort of stuff of it, which they're quite poor. And so she's documenting all of this, and then suddenly there's a big change, which is two brothers, I believe, become owners of the property or landlords of the property. So it's very similar, obviously, in concept, Jenna, to Pride and Prejudice, where these two, eligible brothers move in next door. But then it's also quite different because it's got that kind of mix of like very romantic setting of this castle, and this sort of realism of Rose, who's the older sister, who wants to try and marry the older brother Simon. And then there's quite a lot of complications with that, and Cassandra herself, and who she's developing feelings for. The boy who lives, who's the son of the cook, who's remained on with the property, who there's actually a film called that was made where it's a very young Henry Cavill actually playing. Yes. And then I just, one, it's the atmosphere of this book. Two, the narrator is just so honest and completely draws you in. It's told as a series of diary entries, so you're really getting glimpses into like her falling in love and the emotions that go with it, and these amazing scenes of her like swimming in the moat of the castle with a guy, and just a really atmospheric, beautiful read.
The voice is so strong in that book. That's something that really
Yes.
stuck out to me. Did that influence you when you were like developing any of your own narrative voices in any of your writing?
I think for me, like I'm always like for me, my primary focus is I just love romance, and I love like delving deep into all the emotions for characters. Yeah, whether that's falling in love or whether that's unrequited love or you know, heartbreak or loss or any other kind of emotional thing they're going through, particularly in those that, you know, age group between like 13 and 18. Like it's a really incredible time. So,
Yeah, it's so
yeah.
potent. Yeah. Okay, well, my next one is Anna and the French Kiss. My light is so shiny on these covers, which I just love. The first time I saw this book, this is going to sound terrible, but like when I saw the cover and the title, I was like, that looks so bad, which is terrible. Isn't it? I do judge books by their covers. I mean, who doesn't? I'm sorry, but like it's just this like stock model like disembodied hands, and I'm just like but they reissued it with much nicer covers if you ever pick up one of those. But the book, honestly, it's like one of my all-time favorite books. It's about if you haven't read it, it's about a teen girl called Anna, and she gets sent to Paris, which is like very timely with Emily in Paris. If anyone's been watching that, if you enjoy Emily in Paris, read Anna and the French Kiss, because it's like 100 times superior. But yeah, it's about a teen girl, and she's a bit like grumpy about being sent to Paris. Like she feels like she's been shipped off by her family and is very resistant to being there, which is not entirely relatable, but you go along for the ride because she has her own reasons. But she meets this boy who even though I've got a French surname, I cannot speak French, so I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of his name, but he's Etienne St. Clair. And he is just like, he's a British boy with a Parisian name, and like he knows all the culture, and he just like he romances her. He takes her to like all of the beautiful spots in Paris and feeds her amazing food, and she's really into film, so he takes her to you know, this cool like little theater that shows all these French films. The catch is he has a girlfriend, which this sounds horrible, because like, you know, cheating is, especially with romance, is often a big no-no. But it's just the way that this romance is written. Obviously it's like, I kind of like, I do kind of hate the trope where it's like the other woman is like really villainized, and like you know, it's like pitting girls against each other. And I think this book does a pretty good job of like showing the complicated scenario and the nuance of it, and you kind of sympathize with all of the characters. And she just does the tension. Stephanie Perkins just writes the tension so well. There's this scene like that has always stuck with me, where like they're at the cinema, and just there's like the crackle between them. They're sitting next to each other. It's just like such a visceral thing when you're a teenager. I think going to the movies with someone you like, and sitting next to them in a dark theater, and like the thing of like, do we hold hands? Are we going to touch each other? We're bumping elbows. We're reaching into the popcorn at the same time. Like it just brought back all of those memories, and that's really stuck with me. So yeah, I think this is a book which I can't remember the exact year it came out, but I think it was like the late 2000s or early 2010s. And I remember reading it and just like was so happy the whole time. I read it in like a day and felt really happy, and like I closed it and just happy smiled and just wanted to hug it. And I remember like putting it down and being like, that's the kind of book I want to write. Or like if I can give someone like that kind of feeling with my writing, like that's what I want to do. And I think that it really drew me to YA fiction and YA rom-coms in particular. So that's it for me.
I have that by my bed. I need to read it. It's sitting there. I got it earlier, like as a feel-good one during COVID. So okay, now you're getting me to like pick it up now.
Yeah, it's so good. Look, I haven't reread it in a while, and like I'm a little bit worried that when I talk about like the aspect of like, oh, he's got a girlfriend, like when you talk about it, it does sound kind of bad, but I'm like, no, I'm sure every time I've read it, it just like it pulls, and like you don't like, yeah, you just, because you sympathize with Anna, but you don't like, he's not too much of a douche about it. I mean, he is like flirting with another girl while he has a girlfriend. But it's complicated. Anyway, he's really dreamy. And also like I like that he's a short boy with bad teeth.
Yeah.
I think it's like not enough like flawed YA heroes. So I do like that aspect as well. But let's go back to Nina. What's your next pick?
My next pick is Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. So this is a recent read for me. I read it, I think, at the start of this year. Again, this is another one I am obsessed with the cover. I think it's just such a beautiful cover. It is, it's another slow burn. It is about Penny, who is she's going off to college in Texas. She's Korean American, kind of introverted, but very in from her. It's a dual perspective, her and Sam, the boy, and she's quite judgmental and sort of spiky and cynical. And so if you look at like the Goodreads reviews, you'll find a lot of people saying she's so unlikable, and but that's what I love about it. She's a difficult character, and Sam, he is this tattooed, anxious, depressed guy who works at the coffee shop and also lives in sort of a house above where he works, and he's struggling in a lot of different ways. And they meet and they start a kind of relationship where they text each other all the time, and the texting banter is just so good, and there's just so much that's just really smart and funny and interesting about the book. I just love it, and I love the dual point of view is very inspiring to me right now in my writing, and I just think it's really good.
Amazing. Actually, Anna and the French Kiss has really good text banter as well. You just reminded me.
Really?
I love some text banter. Tara, what about you? What's your next pick?
Yeah, so my next pick is a Love Oz YA. So that is The Fabulous Making Friends with Alice Dyson by Poppy. And I'm so sorry about Poppy's last name. I'm not sure if it's Nwusu or, sorry, Poppy, if you are watching or happen to watch, sorry about that. But no, I read this year and absolutely loved it. So it's the story of Alice Dyson, and she's in her final year of high school. She's very studious. She's extremely focused, and she wants to stay completely under the radar. That's what she's used to, and that's what she likes. And then suddenly, all of that is kind of thrown topsy-turvy when she's the video of her dancing with a boy called Teddy goes viral. And suddenly she's thrust into the spotlight. Teddy's, around every second. He's this kind of fabulous bundle of energy and enthusiasm and fun. And at first she just wants Teddy to go away and leave her alone. She doesn't want the attention. And then kind of little by little you see them become friends and become closer throughout the book. It starts to develop into something a little bit more. And I loved the feel of this book. I felt like she captured that time, like that last year in high school when, everything's about to change. It's about to change. A chapter's going to close. And she kind of explored as well this Alice's best friend sort of was acting a bit different. Their friendship kind of is changing as well. It was very similar to kind of how I felt at that period of my life. And I also, with Poppy, she creates these amazing love interests as well. Like they're so real and authentic, and you kind of half fall in love with them yourself.
Amazing. I'll just touch on that because it is a new read, and Nina, you've mentioned new reads as well. Is that something as a writer, when you're reading romance or books in general, are you looking for inspiration, or you think you just happen to find it along the way, or what excites you as a writer when you're reading?
Great voice. And I'm sort of, some people say they can't, like if you're writing a YA, they can't read any other YA. I like to sort of go find a lot of YA that'll get me in the feel for the voice and why I love it, and read a whole bunch, and then I might write, go and read some nonfiction or something completely different, just to sort of freshen my mind and while I'm writing. But I like to keep going back, and for me it's voice and good sort of dynamic between characters.
Is that the same for you, Tara?
Yeah, definitely. That dynamic between characters thing, like, when you see that, and you see that kind of there from the very beginning, that's exciting, isn't it? It just draws you in, and sort of seeing, what happens between them emotionally and so forth as well.
Yeah. Melissa, what about you? Do you find yourself picking up tips or inspiration with newer books you're reading as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely character-driven stuff is my jam. I love, like, give me strong characters over, an intricate plot any day. I really like reading YA outside of my genre, because I write contemporary and romance, but reading YA, good YA sci-fi that has really strong characters, and just seeing what other people are doing, or what other people can do in different genres, I think is really exciting and really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, what's your next pick? Is it a character-driven one?
Yes. Strangely enough, it's Enemies to Lovers. My next pick is Red, White and Royal Blue, which I think is on probably a lot of people's favourite rom-com lists of the last year. I adored this book. I got this book as an ebook initially, and then had to buy the hard copy because I just had to have it on my shelf. It was one of those books. So this is the story of Alex, who is the son of the first female president of the United States, and Henry, who is the second in line to the British throne, who are, through various misunderstandings and incidents, are confirmed enemies, but thrown together and forced to pretend to be friends when images of them, a drunken incident gets leaked to the tabloids. And of course they then discover that there is more to each other than they initially thought, and they have this really beautiful, and I think slow burn kind of relationship build, friendship that turns into something more. So obviously it's a big kind of fairy tale, big modern kind of queer fairy tale, but there's something just incredibly real about these characters, even though they're in this kind of insane situation. The characters are really beautiful, and they have these really lovely kind of interactions and conversations and banter and texts, and as their relationship develops, these just gorgeous emails back and forth between them. And it has a really great squad, which is always a bonus for me. Their friends and family and their sisters are really, really wonderful and kind of round out their story really well. And I think, it also has a particular resonance in the current climate, because it's just so hopeful. His Alex's mother is this, really amazing kind of progressive, kick-ass female president, and there's this beautiful groundswell of support for them when their relationship is revealed. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and the writing is really gorgeous as well. There's just there's a particular scene, if you without spoilers, but with the characters and their family, their sisters, sister, they're sitting by a lake, and there's the way she just describes the atmosphere, and the sisters playing Annie's song on the guitar, and it's just like beautiful. So yeah, I love this book. I've read this book this came out last year, and I think I've read it possibly 3 times.
Wow.
It's one of those, I think it gave me a real book hangover, actually, that I found it difficult to read something else afterwards because nothing kind of hit the right note. So I think I just went back and kind of read it again. Yeah.
That's book, I haven't read it yet, because that's one of those books where, do you ever have books where you're going to love it, so you want to save it until that perfect moment where you can just totally get absorbed in it and dedicate your whole mind and body and soul to it. Like that's like waiting for me. So who knows when that's going to happen? Maybe I should just let go of that notion and just read it because it does sound amazing.
Yeah.
Well, my next pick is Pre-Loved by Shirley Ma. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's an Australian YA book, and it's about a girl called Amy who is Chinese Australian, and she's dealing with kind of a conflict around her identity and wanting to distance herself from her mum and her mum's superstitions. And then she's got this really popular, pretty, really toxic, actually, best friend who like kind of just puts her down and is quite nasty without Amy necessarily realizing it at first, and kind of walks all over her. And then in amongst all of this, she finds this old locket, and a ghost appears, and it's a ghost from the 80s. His name is Logan, and he is just like this dreamy boy from the 80s who just starts like following her around. And they have a really lovely romance, which is you know, it's very bizarre. He is a ghost. What is it about ghosts? Like, it's not, I guess it's paranormal romance, but it's not like, I wouldn't classify it as paranormal romance in the genre of like what you would think of as paranormal romance. I think there's just like this really, there's a lot of humor and heart and warmth to it. And it is like, the romance is really beautiful, but it is also about kind of Amy's own journey with herself and her identity and learning to like love herself as well. And all of those things are things that I'm very passionate about. And I think the kind of toxic friendship dynamic is something that definitely stood out to me, because that's something that I experienced when I was a teenager, and that was something that I was kind of wanting to write about. So that really stood out to me when I was reading it. And also when I was writing my second book, You Were Made for Me, which is about two girls who kind of create the perfect guy. And so it's like this kind of light fantasy element, which I think that's why I like Pre-Loved is kind of a gentle fantasy, I would say. I definitely like look to that for like a way to do a book that feels contemporary but has this light kind of fantasy element, and I think it's just so beautifully done. So yeah, that influenced me in that way, and I definitely highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. But this will go with our final round of books, and then we'll throw to some audience questions before we wrap up for the night. But Nina, what about you? What's your last pick?
Sorry, was that me?
Yeah, can you hear us okay?
My net has just gone fast.
Okay. Since Nina, I think Nina's a bit frozen, so why don't we go, Melissa, why don't we go back to you if that's okay? Sorry, Nina.
Okay, so my last pick is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This is also quite a recent read for me, and one that I've read more than once. I actually picked it up last night, yesterday afternoon, to just refresh my memory of the first few chapters, and then accidentally read the whole thing again. Again, it's enemies to lovers. It also has one of my kind of love-hate tropes, which is the unrealistic publishing house. So they're both Lucy and Joshua, who are thrown together when their two publishing houses merge, and they're forced to basically sit across from each other and doing the same role. They're executive assistants to their respective CEOs, and they apparently hate each other on sight from first meeting. And so a year later, their entire relationship is made up of pranks and games of one-upmanship, basically. Although they're both kind of very obviously obsessed with each other. I think what I really liked about this book is that it teeters on the edge of overplaying some romance tropes and cliches, but always kind of manages to be self-aware enough that and the characters are really personable enough that it really feels fresh and really smart. The main character, Lucy, on paper, there's so much about her that I shouldn't like, because she's, this kind of quintessential, she's always described as tiny, and she's very cute, and she collects Smurfs, and she bakes cakes for the office, but there's just something about her that's really genuine, and really, she's got a kind of spine of steel. And I like books that, particularly romance books that can, hello, welcome back, um, that can take those tropes and just kind of twist them and play with them and make them feel like there's something that you haven't read or haven't encountered in that way before. And I think Josh is kind of one of my favorite kind of male types, in that he's presented as this kind of, you know, very buff alpha kind of hard ass dude, but he's really a hot mess underneath, and he's really kind of shy and weird and awkward. He's also described as looking like Clark Kent, which, you know, yum. And yeah, so I think it also, I generally prefer sort of sweet romances. It's very sweet, but it does have some very steamy scenes that I think are done very well. So
It's very, very hot.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
is so much fun, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
like such a fun read.
So much. And I think what you mentioned, Melissa, about the tropes, I think it's a really good example that like tropes are not a dirty word. And
No.
especially when you're in romance, I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's really tropey, or it's got this trope or that trope. But actually, for me, tropes are a draw card. You know, when they're just a tool that you use to kind of build the story in an interesting way and try and do fresh things with the recognized format.
Yeah.
Tara, what about you? What's your next book?
Yeah. So my next one's another Love Oz YA. Probably one of my most favorite YAs I've ever read, which is Words in Deep Blue by Kath Crowley. This one just absolutely blew me away. I think it came out in 2016. I just loved everything about it. It's kind of a love story for anybody who loves books, basically. So it's the story of Rachel and Henry, who are best friends. And so Rachel, the night before her family's due to move away, she tries to tell Henry how she feels about him, that she's kind of fallen for him. And Henry spends Rachel's last night in town with somebody else. So she's left a note, and he's never read it. So she moves away. I think around 2 or 3 years go by. And then she moves back to Melbourne again, and everything's completely different. Her brother, who she was really close to, has drowned. She's failed her last year of school. She wants nothing to do with the ocean. She used to be obsessed with the ocean, and wanted to go into science and fish, etc. And yeah, she ends up sort of taking this position where Henry works. So Henry's family owns this fabulous secondhand bookstore called Howling Books. And they have this section in the bookstore called the letter library. And that's where customers are allowed to write in the books. They can circle words they love. They can highlight lines, leave notes to people in the margins, just record their thoughts, really. Yeah, and they kind of leave a part of themselves behind in those books. So she's tasked with taking down all of those notes because Henry's family are in the process of selling that bookstore. So she hasn't told Henry about what's happened to her brother. She can't talk about it. She's in sort of that really heavy stage of grief. And yeah, it's just Kath's writing is just exquisite. It's just the most beautiful book. Like, if you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. And yeah, it's just, as well as kind of exploring this relationship between Rachel and Henry, it's also, you know, about love and family and loss and you know, love for the written word. Yeah, it's really one of my top picks.
Yeah, amazing. It is beautiful. I love love stories to books as well. I think
Yeah.
playing to the right audience with the readers. Nina, are you back with us? I think you might have frozen again. I think she's frozen, so I might share my next read, and hopefully by the time I'm done, she'll be back with us. But my last one is Love Oz YA as well as Summer Skin, although it is a bit more new adultish, but we don't really have that category strongly in Australia. So I think it does get pulled into Oz YA, but Summer Skin by Kirsty Eager. And I just think it's just such a fun, beautiful, really hot read as well. It's about a girl called Jess, and she's at uni, and she decides to take revenge on. She's staying on campus at a college, and then there's a college, Knights College, which is full of kind of bros, frat bro. Basically, Australia's equivalent of frat bros, and she decides to take revenge on this college for something that happened to one of her friends in the previous year, and so that she basically kidnaps this boy and ties him to a chair, and some hijinksy stuff happens, and so that's the kind of start of their connection, which is an interesting way to start a romance, but it is very much an enemies to lovers romance as well, which as they get to know each other, they learn that there's much more to each other than meets the eye. But I think what I love about this book and what really influenced me was just how it is very Australian. Like when you describe it, it kind of sounds quite American, because it's like it's almost like sororities and frats, but Kirsty takes like what is kind of a very American premise and grounds it very firmly in Australia, and these characters feel very distinctly Australian, and that was something that really inspired me, because I think I similarly in my writing like to take very American tropes and kind of ground them in a very Australian feeling, because I think as much as I love American rom-coms, there's nothing quite like local flavour. And Nina, I think you're back with us. So are you okay? Do you want to share with us?
Okay, so this is, I don't know, I blame the NBN, which was just installed, and apparently it comes with problems.
Yeah. I think that's fair to blame. But do you want to share your last pick with us?
So my last pick is Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I feel like is maybe slightly controversial to deem in the romance world, but I just I love this book. If you haven't read it, it's an Irish novel. It's about Connell and Marianne, who go to high school together and develop this relationship. She is sort of rich and doesn't have many friends at high school, and his mother is her family's cleaner, and he's a popular jock, and they start this secret relationship, and then it just kind of follows them throughout their lives as they are friends and they're lovers, and throughout their early 20s. And I just think it is a beautiful book. I also love the TV adaptation, and it's full of angst, and I love angst. And yeah.
Would you say it's slow burn as well?
I guess it is. Well, no, because they're sleeping together pretty early on.
Yeah. I guess it's like, how would you describe slow burn? Because it's kind of like, I mean, I've only seen the show, I haven't read the book, I have to admit, but like from my impression is like they do get together, but the emotion, it's almost like an emotional slow burn. Like
story. Yes. It's just, and it's all very much just about them and their feelings. There's a scene in the book kind of early on where Connell doesn't take her to a dance, and I wept and wept. All this because she didn't get to go to the dance with him. I was like, this is intense. It's a very intense book.
So related.
I also want to say that I love The Hating Game. That was actually originally on my list.
Okay.
And I also love Words in Deep Blue so much.
Yeah.
So many good picks tonight.
I know.
I might throw to the voice of God, who is monitoring our comments section, and ask if we have any questions. Anna? Is God there? Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
Maybe she's having similar problems that I was. There's a curse on the technology.
Yeah. Look, if we don't hear from her in the next little bit, we might just have to wrap it up, unfortunately. And
did that work? Oh, by Jenna's face, I'll say yes. I was having a little chat to myself on mute. I mean, not mute, but like another mute. There's lots of mutes. God is in control. Don't worry. Everything is is fine. And I do have lots of wonderful questions, and we'll start with a really simple one from Danielle Binks that says, the same way there's normally a mystery element in all stories, there's normally romance elements in all stories too. So why isn't rom-com universally respected?
Because teenage girls like it,
I've got to go.
and anything that they like is immediately deemed lesser.
I was going to say, yeah, it's seen as a female genre, so automatically less respect, sadly.
Yeah, it's misogyny, plain and simple. I think like you've just got to look at the way male writers are treated. Male writers who write rom-coms are treated, and especially a lot of the time they aren't classified as rom-coms. They might just be like contemporary fiction, and it's like clearly a rom-com, but it's not marketed as a rom-com. And like, yeah, it's misogyny in my opinion.
It's such a shame for young male readers as well, because I know, particularly with my first book, which is a rom-com that has male protagonists, I've had so much feedback from young boys who've read it and loved it, and you know, don't get the chance to explore relationships through the stuff that they read because it's kind of kept out of their hands as being not for them.
Bang, James.
Yeah, they're missing out for sure.
I think they're all such fabulous points, and some I hadn't actually considered. Sorry, but God has considered all things. So Laura is asking, what's your favourite romance trope? I reckon we can guess after those. Sorry, go ahead.
For myself, one that I haven't mentioned tonight actually is fake dating, which I love.
Love fake dating.
Yes, I just love. I just finished If I Never Met You by Barry McFarlane, which is fake dating, which I really love. And To All the Ways I've Loved Before is another favorite of mine. I didn't mention them tonight mainly because I was talking more about books that influenced me while I was writing, and these are just books that I love. But yeah, fake dating. What about you guys?
I'm probably similar, I think, to Jenna and Melissa, like we were talking about, obviously, enemies to lovers and then friends to more.
I love enemies to lovers. I love enemies to reluctant friends to better friends to, maybe there's something to lovers. But that kind of works best over like seasons of a TV show. I also like There's Only One Bed, which I did put in my own book.
Yeah. That was so good. It sounded better in my head. I love that. There's Only One Bed. That's one of my favorite tropes. Love it.
Excellent.
Melissa, what about you?
Oh, I think even though all of my recs were enemies to lovers, I think friends to lovers is definitely my go-to. I think all of my books are friends to lovers. Yeah, I just love that idea of having two characters that connect first beyond the idea of them being attracted to each other, and then kind of developing that relationship with a good solid basis of friendship there. Definitely the sharing a bed though.
Just mention that, and I'm hooked. Like that's the flat share. Has everyone read that? Like that whole sharing a bed. I'm like, yes.
The whole book is sharing a bed.
They never leave the bed. No, they do.
In the same vein, Danielle Bings asks, what's a traditional trope that you'd love to see flipped or modernised?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's too hard.
Tick.
Yes. God,
all of them.
Yeah, traditional trope. I mean, I guess a traditional is very much like the alpha male, like which I like really turns me off. So I mean, there's Twilight obviously was like kind of, and I love Twilight, but I think I'd be interested to see how that could be done in like a modern feminist way. I don't know that I've read it in that sense.
Or is it the modern feminist, Jenna? Sorry, we'll We could have the hugest session on Twilight. I'm going to keep going just because we've got quite a few to get through. Is that okay? Or do you guys have another one you'd like to let go? She's like, go, go, go. Okay. Siobhan Plaza, I've never heard of her before, but she's just suddenly chimed in and said, if someone came to you asking for their first ever romance read, what book would you recommend to them?
The Hating Game.
I would agree. The Hating Game. I think that's like a really quintessential romance that has, like, as Melissa was saying, like it kind of has all these great tropes that it's a really good example of the genre.
Great, that was so fast. Okay, it sounds romantic. So then that was really quick. Hang on a second. Catch up with yourself. Velicor B would love to know if anyone has a fictional love triangle that you think ended wrongly.
It's a great question.
Well, I can't think of one from a book. Definitely, Andy should have ended up with Ducky in Pretty in Pink.
It's so funny. Yeah. I was reading through that. Who was it last night? Was doing like a they were doing like a deep dive on that, and they were having a full conversation about Pretty in Pink and that concept. Yeah.
Maybe she.
It's okay. You can have that opinion, Melissa. I just agree.
It's wrong though.
Blaine.
Not forever, but just for the moment.
Yeah.
She wasn't attracted to Ducky. That's the trouble.
Blaine was so bland.
Yeah. For me, the option was right for her. I don't think.
No, true.
I want to say this is, again, it's not a book, but it's probably top of my mind because I'm rewatching Friends, which I am like have always been, as an adult, I've been very anti-Friends, but it dropped on Netflix, so I thought I'd give it a go. But I think Rachel should have ended up with Joey. Which is not popular.
Topic, even more so, but my controversial opinion is that I think Joey is the worst character on Friends.
No, he's the best.
Yeah, no, worst. He's the most selfish. He just takes their money. I think the word, and that's saying something because Ross is bad.
Ross, yeah.
They're all terrible humans. See, like for me, like Phoebe and Joey are like the only slightly redeemable ones. But I'm only on like season 3, so maybe I'll change as I go on. But anyway, Tara, what about you?
We've gone way off track.
I know. I'm trying to think of a fictional example. It's probably going to hit me like later on in the middle of the night.
Oh, I have one that again is a little off topic because I haven't read the books, but in the Vampire Diaries, I think that it should have ended with Elena and Stefan together, even though I am a shipper of her and Damon, but if she was going, they would never have been happy. This is, I guess, a spoiler, as humans. Whereas I think it should have come full circle and they should have got back together.
Interesting. I disagree.
Okay, it's getting a little heated in the room. Slow down there, guys. Cool off. Cool off. A question from D. Binks, mystery. What would they recommend people watch right now who'd like to delve into romance? There's so much great stuff streaming, but what do you love?
Why is my mind gone blank?
The only thing I'm watching at the moment, I just started Emily in Paris. Anybody else got anything?
I would recommend it's on Stan. It's called The Baker and the Beauty. That's a really good romance series. It unfortunately isn't getting another season, so I'm kind of devastated about that. But apparently it is based on another show, so maybe I should delve into that. But yeah, Baker and the Beauty, it's like very much like if you're into Hallmark romances, it has that kind of vibe, but it's much more inclusive and progressive than a lot of those romances. So it's about a celebrity who's the beauty, and she meets a baker he's like a normie guy, and like they fall in love, and that's the complication is that she's famous. So it's very simple, very gentle, good to escape into.
I just watched the new, and this is not a romance, but it has a small kind of romance subplot that I did really like. The new show on Apple, which is called Ted Lasso.
Oh, I heard that's good.
It's so wholesome, it's so heartwarming, and there's a really lovely romantic subplot that between two sort of side characters that is so lovely that the whole thing is just very heartwarming. I also, even though this is not really romance, I enjoyed Love Life on Stan with Anna Kendrick. I guess it's not romance because it's all about failing. Like every episode is kind of a failed situation, but there is a lot of romantic relationship stuff in there.
Yeah, actually Modern Love on Amazon Prime is also, it's like a good anthology series that tells different love stories in each episode. And there's one with Dev Patel, so obviously highly recommend that because I just love him. Melissa, do you have any recs?
I really enjoyed the gender flipped High Fidelity, which I think is on, it might be on SBS or ABC. It's on one of those on demand with Zoe
Kravitz.
Kravitz.
Yeah.
It's Zoe Kravitz. So again, not sort of, traditionally romance, although it is about, her failed relationships. And I just thought they did a really good job with the the flipping of the John Cusack kind of character, and she's very cool, and she's got some very kind of cool exes, and the kind of romance subplot is quite nice. The guy that she meets and how that develops. I'm not sure if there's going to be a second season because it sort of felt like it ended in an odd spot, but yeah, I enjoyed that.
I've been watching a little bit of New Girl as well, rewatching a bit of it. Yeah.
New Girl has one of the best on-screen kisses of all time, like first kisses.
It does.
Absolutely best.
And just that slow burn build.
Yeah. Slow burn. We should have had a bingo of how many tropes we mentioned tonight. Anna, why don't we just go with one more question if there is one more, because we're running into overtime, so we'll wrap it up.
Well, we're done. I believe you did it.
Oh,
because the one that I thought that was the last one was actually a copied one from earlier. I think I've caught them all. Yep.
Well, thank you for the amazing questions to our audience that we can't see, and thank you, Nina, Tara, and Melissa, for joining me tonight for this amazing chat. I have my to be read list has grown already. I think we will tweet out and share on Instagram the list of books tonight, so you can A, add them to your to read piles, and B, check off your bingo card if you have, and if you've got a bingo, if you've guessed 4 books correct, get in touch with us and you'll win a prize. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for joining us.